Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello. Everybody find a seat. There's plenty of space. There's stools back over here, plenty of chairs. I swear the guy at the back table doesn't bite. I haven't seen him do that in years, so you definitely can join him back there. Feel free. Again, this is very informal, so if you need to get up to get your food, that's okay. Bring in your drinks and so on. All right. My name's Jim Gow. Welcome to the Grit City Think and Drink. So this is the first. We take the summer off now, so this is our first one starting up in the fall. So I'm super excited to get this kicked off tonight. For those of you, I don't have the thing up here. I'll pull it up later. For those of you who don't know, this is the second Tuesday of every month, so you can show up any month and second Tuesday, and we will be here at 6:30. We have a whole slew of different speakers lined up for this year, so from all kinds of different areas. Our next speaker in November is actually in the room. Leanne Chafee is going to be talking about psychology of food, so very going to be a really cool talk. So I hope you'll join us. Also, the way this works, and I should have my sponsor. Well, I don't really have sponsors. I have people who do help pay the speakers and help support this thing. Big thanks to Seven Seas, who gives us the back room to use for free as part of this. So that's awesome. My employer, University of Washington Tacoma, so I'm a professor over there. I've been running this now. I think this is our seventh year doing this, so it's crazy. Super excited to do it some more. So we do have a couple of months open. So if you have speaker ideas, people you think would be wonderful as a speaker, let me know. I'll put my email up there later and you guys can feed me ideas. That would be great. So the way this works, I'm going to introduce our awesome speaker. She's going to give you a talk to knock your socks off. And then we will give her a short break. We'll give away some prizes. So if you haven't gotten a ticket yet, they're free. And I will give you one after the break. And then after that, we can do Q&A and stump the speaker. All right, you guys ready for that? Sorry, I don't actually warn the speakers in advance, so it's much more fun that way. All right, without further ado, I will introduce Jessie Kissar, is an assistant professor at the University of Washington Tacoma in the School of Urban Studies. She researches racial capitalism, grassroots planning, and urban land and resource struggles in the U.S. Her work centers on the organizing and theorizing of Black and Indigenous communities to shape cities, particularly the city of Detroit, which I lived in for a short time when I was a kid, and has been published in Theory, Culture, and Society, Antipode, American Indian and Culture Research Journal, and the Detroit People's Atlas, and the award-winning edited volume Racial Ecologies. Awesome. Her current research explores the ways that anti-Black racism and settler colonialism operate together in processes of gentrification in Detroit. Without further ado, Dr. Kissar.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to share this with you. So I teach in the School of Urban Studies, and most of my work is about gentrification. And also sort of the interplay between anti-Black racism and gentrification and settler colonialism. They sort of all three of those working together. And this, what I'm about to present to you is it's like a little side project or like kind of a hobby. I've never actually talked publicly or published on this. It's more like a rabbit hole that I often just like to go down just because I like to go down it. So that's, I don't know, that's what it is. But yeah, so that's what it is. Okay, so this is the Nain Rouge. How many, has anybody here heard of the Nain Rouge other than like me, maybe like sort of obsessively talking about it drunkenly at night or something? You, yeah, you do, because you know you're from Detroit. Okay. There's a lot of different images of the Nain. A lot of people call it the Nain. But this is the Nain. He's sort of like a local Detroit kind of like boogeyman. And I first got introduced to the Nain kind of through my research because I went to a march in Detroit called the March du Nain. It's a festival that started in 2012. And it's it's a festival about the Nain, but the idea is you're sort of like banishing the Nain from the city of Detroit, because the Nain is supposed to be like a harbinger of bad luck. This is what it looks like. And here's what the march says. Like, this is from their website. It says that the Nain Rouge has been a harbinger of doom since the time of Detroit's founding. Each year we hold a parade in the Cass Corridor to trick the Nain with our terrible French and costumes. So the French is because it's sort of it's like an old settler tale passed down from like the French settlers, the early French settlers of Detroit. Detroit was originally like founded by French settlers. We're going to talk about them. And the idea behind the march is that you dress up in wild costumes, and you and somebody else dresses up as the Nain. Like, there's a person who who dresses up as the Nain, and everybody in the march, like, the whole fun of the march is to like throw stuff at the Nain and to call it names and to banish it, to get rid of it, to get it out of town, to get the bad luck out of town, right? So have something to say to the Nain. Here's your chance to add to the witty barbs we sling at him at the parade and on social media. Share your taunt. Here's some more about the Nain. The Nain always this march kind of like ends right here, and the Nain always like unfurls a banner. It's like kind of his platform for the mischief he wants to cause for the year. There's the person who's pretending to be the Nain. And then they're like, no, we're going to shower you with bubbles and banish you. All right. So that's what how I encountered the Nain, was to be, and I was to go to this march. And I was partially going to this march because the march itself was kind of like rising up as gentrification was sort of beginning to happen. And so that's how I wound up at this march, because anyways, we'll talk about it. Okay. Not there yet. Yeah, so the Nain is narrated as a symbol of bad luck for the city. It's fun to hate, and this matters a lot because Detroit is heavily identified with bad luck. It's a city, and a lot of it's like very serious bad luck. I mean, it's not bad luck. I mean, there's catastrophes that have happened that are continuing to happen in Detroit. It's a city that has been through an economic crisis that has lasted almost 70 years. It's endured white flight, industrial flight, emergency financial management from the state that essentially took away Detroiters' local democratic power. So this is in the same period that the march is being founded. And through that emergency financial management, all sorts of other catastrophes have happened. Mass water shutoffs, the largest tax foreclosure in U.S. history, bankruptcy. I mean, this is like, so Detroiters, especially Detroiters that have been there a long time, have endured a lot. And especially, yeah, so, okay. But I think what was interesting was that the march was really narrating that, and at the same time was being done, sort of put on by folks who largely weren't the sort of people who were bearing the brunt of that. So the march was founded in 2012 by two white Wayne State University law students. And it was happening in this period of like sort of tremendous upheaval, real hardship for folks in Detroit. But it was also this sort of moment of Detroit just suddenly beginning to be narrated as like coming back, as like, I don't know if you've heard this. I used to sit on airplanes and people would be like, "What do you do?" And I'd be like, "I'm a professor." And they'd be like, "What do you study?" And I'd say, "Detroit." And inevitably the next words out of their mouth would be, "I hear Detroit's coming back." So there was this real upsurge of this narrative of Detroit coming back. And what inevitably that meant was white people were coming back. And it really was sort of hitting an apex in this period, right? In like 2012, 2013, 2014, where property values had really hit rock bottom. You could buy a house for like a couple of $1,000s, and people that were being priced out of other communities were looking to Detroit as a place to live, and were moving. Lots and lots of people were moving to Detroit. This is I don't know, it's a sign. It's like a boosterism kind of sign about moving to Detroit, and it's in Brooklyn. And of course, it's also narrating Detroit as empty, be left alone, which I don't know. I spend a lot of time analyzing that because I look at narratives of emptiness as like settler narratives. Anyways, it's a side note. There's a lot of other metaphors. Go Midwest, young man. These are settler narratives. Anyways, okay. So, hi, sweet pea. All right. So, I think it's sort of important if you don't know Detroit, Detroit is actually the least white major city in the United States. In 2012, when this was started, it was 83% Black. It's just a little bit less than that now, but not that much less. It also has a significant Middle Eastern and Mexican community. And it was also a destination city during urban relocation. So it has a really strong intertribal community also. And yeah, and then these are the communities that really have sort of like borne the brunt of this crisis. Okay. But as displacement and crisis was really ramping up for these longtime residents, the city's low property values suddenly made it valuable. It made it attractive for new, mostly white residents coming from more expensive cities, and for new investors looking to get in at the bottom, right, looking to buy low. And so, as the city has undergone this period of rebirth, the legend of the Nain has also been revived from this legend that's been passed down through generations of French settlers. All right, here we are. He's on t-shirts. More t-shirts. Oh, more t-shirts. T-shirts. He's on this coaster. There's a beer brewery named after him, and also just like a beer variety. Also wine. Also absinthe and weed. And here's a comic book that somebody named Joseph Bastian wrote about the Nain. And I thought this was really interesting because Joseph Bastian is he's a real like booster of the Nain, or of the sort of like legend of the Nain. And he's really, and he makes this really explicit link. I was reading an interview with him, and he made this really explicit link between the resurgence of like Nain storyness and also and like the revival of the city. So he says, what's so exciting is that you've got all this renewal in Detroit, and the legend is part of it. So that's what he says. All right, so the march is a majority white event to banish a red imp in a majority Black but gentrifying city, which is like just like really specific. It's a real something. And it was the thing that when I first walked into the march, I was like, what is even happening right now? And so that's what got me obsessed with it. So that's the beginning of my hobby, was showing up at this march and being like, what is happening here? What is this? Where did this legend come from? What's going on? Okay, so sit back. I'm going to tell you the legend of the Nain. There he is. Okay. Whatever else is said about the Nain Rouge, he's always red. Sometimes red eyes, sometimes red boots made out of the furs and animal skins that attracted 18th century European speculators to the Great Lakes. Sometimes the more general, small, dark, and ugly. In the comic book version of him, his feet are wrapped in rags, and always red skin, and always brandishing gleeful antagonism from the moment of his first encounter with Antoine de la Motte Cadillac, French explorer, speculator, whose personal history was peppered with deals of questionable integrity, general scoundrel, and founder of the city of Detroit. This is the first sort of written record of the Nain. From the 1883 volume of tales passed down among French settlers. It's the Legends of Le Detroit, or Le Detroit. It goes like this. Okay, so this is the story that was written in here. It's like weirdly specific and historical. It's 1701. There's a party in the Chateau Saint Louis. This is it, which is the mansion of the colonial French governor in Quebec. And it's to celebrate a new commission awarded to Cadillac to establish a new colony and fort on the strait in between Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie, which is now called the Detroit River. Detroit in French is the strait. Um, so Antoine had just returned from his post as the commander of Fort Michilimackinac, where he has made a small fortune illegally selling liquor. But at this moment, he is drunk himself at the party, sitting before a fortune teller. And the fortune teller here is described as having dark and swarthy complexion. And here's what she tells him. She says, "This town that he founds will undergo hardship, but will grow. His future," she tells him, and she also like sort of scolds him in this tale about his liquor business. So his future will depend on his own behavior, specifically how he treats a red dwarf, the Nain Rouge, who he will encounter in the near future. If he offends the Nain, he will be met with misfortune. Okay, so he shouts at her, he like kicks her out, mad, whatever. He wakes up the next morning, he's probably hungover, but he's persevering, and he sets off with 50 soldiers and 50 other sort of various settlers, like smiths, people like that, for the strait where Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair narrow into what's now called the Detroit River. Okay, so that's the beginning. Fast forward 6 years. It's 1707. It's May Day. It's the 6th anniversary of Detroit's founding. And Antoine, so Antoine chose this site strategically because he's trying to corner the fur market. That's his whole deal. He wants money. He wants cash money. And so that they're celebrating this town that they founded. And Antoine is he's drunk again. It's May Day, and he's still kind of a jerk. Okay, so it turns out, so in the story, Cadillac isn't the first person who sees the Nain. It's the sort of like this working class woman who lives in the fort in this village, and she sees the Nain and is excited and tells her husband, and the two of them are psyched because they are really irritated by the class dynamics that are happening in this fort. They're saying like, oh my gosh, there's like Cadillac is just taking all the money and he's letting us do all this crap work. Nobody, whatever. Antoine is a jerk, right? And so they see the Nain, they know this story, and they're like, this is great because the Nain is going to knock Cadillac off his high horse. So they overhear this. Cadillac, drunk, and his wife overhear this, and his wife, Marie Therese, is like, wait a second, this is bad news. This is very bad. And Cadillac again is like, this is nothing, and they're having this argument. This is nothing. This is bad news. And the Nain pops, poof, right in front of her. Okay, this is the image of the Nain from that book. Okay, so if you read Legends of Le Detroit, the man had razor sharp teeth. In the Forgotten Tales of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, his teeth were rotted. In Michigan legends, his teeth were both sharp and rotted. Either way, of course, he was red. And perhaps his redness was reason enough. Antoine just like hauls off and just whacks him with his cane, or in some of the tellings, he whacks him with a sword. And the way all of these stories tell it, okay, he gets whacked, and he doesn't cry out, he doesn't strike back. He just looks straight at Antoine, and he laughs, and he goes poof, disappears. Okay, so Antoine was not nice to the Nain. What do you think happened to Antoine? Well, he's looking very sad. So things start to go wrong for him. Things aren't good, right? Okay, so the next year, a report came back to the colonial government in Montreal that his little settlement had managed to attract only 60 settlers, and hundreds of others had abandoned it. The report noted that he was disliked by all that were left. All, it said all. He was charged with multiple counts of abuse of authority by Marquis Pontchartrain and was ordered to leave Detroit. He later went to Louisiana, somehow became governor of that. Talk about that. Claimed to have founded a copper mine in a location where no copper existed, was abandoned by his French financiers, and then removed from office again. Okay, so that's what happens to him. And then he goes back and dies sort of like penniless in France. Okay, so now was this the Nain, or was it just a consequence of his terrible personality? It's unclear. But as the legend goes, the Nain stuck around Detroit, and this curse transferred from the original settler to the settlement itself. Okay, so the Nain is seen again on July 31st, 1763. It's the morning of the Battle of Bloody Run, which was one of Chief Pontiac's most successful battles in the midst of his long siege on Fort Detroit. Pontiac was leading an army of half a dozen tribes. This is an image of him sort of working with all the tribes and forming a coalition. He was working with half a dozen tribes to expel the British from the strait. And the British forces had retreated into Fort Detroit itself, and they were all huddled in this little walled area of this original settlement. And they were looking out, it's not really clear how they saw this, but from the fort, the Nain was seen in the early dark in the morning of July 31st, running along the shore, dancing, doing flips, like having a party sort of around the fort. Okay, that same morning, also in the dark, British troops in their clanking boots tried to sneak up on Pontiac's forces. Okay, so they trudged towards the warriors' encampment, and this is how I imagine it. The British troops' boots are muddy and clumsy. Their bodies smell of nerves and weeks without a bath in Detroit's sticky, buggy summer. They haven't been out of the fort in days, and it's made them jumpy in the woods. They hear a shout in Ojibwe ahead of them. They flinch backwards. They've been seen. Retreat. And then, they hear another shout behind them. And then, imagine this, the Nain. Would he be skipping, cartwheeling? It would be hard in the forest and in the dark, but I'm sure he could manage. And then those troops would know what was coming because they knew about the Nain and they knew whose side he was on. And they lost that handily. Okay, so that was one time. The next time the Nain appeared, some 40 years later, is June 11th of 1805. It was supposed to be the day of the Jubilee at St. Anne's Cathedral. And there was also supposed to be this sort of grand sermon from Father Gabriel Richard. But instead, the entire walled town of Detroit burned. And as villagers were like trying to put out the flames, they saw the Nain like flitting around and like taking sticks and throwing them on new buildings and just setting the whole thing on fire. Like the Nain was just like having a grand old time setting the whole fort on fire. Was the Nain making a statement about the U.S. federal government's incorporation of Michigan territory, which was slated for later that month? If so, message received. The new governor, William Hull, and his new Supreme Court Justice, Judge Augustus Woodward, had journeyed by land and boat from Washington, D.C., ready to govern this new territory. So they hadn't caught word of the fire. They just showed up. And instead, when they landed at the shore of the strait, they found their new capital city was a steaming skeleton of smoldering ruins. All right, this is William Hull. Okay. 7 years later, the same William Hull blamed the Nain for getting him lost in a fog during the War of 1812. He got spooked and accidentally surrendered the strait to the British because he thought he was outnumbered in the fog, but he wasn't. He just was like, yeah, take it all, and then he surrendered it. But no, it was just the Nain whipping up both fog and humiliation for the territory governor. And he actually said this to the press. Like he said that the Nain. Anyway, sorry, I'm fine. Okay. So this is Skinner. This is the second book that came out about the Nain in 1886. So he's in this book. He's Skinner, highlights all of these incidents, but he talks a whole bunch about like the Nain interfering with like people's like causing people to have affairs and like interfering with like all kinds of like personal stuff, people's horses to run away and like a mill to burn down, all this other stuff. All right, just thought I'd mention it. Okay. And the last really big incident that the Nain is seen at is in July of 1967 on the eve of another fire in Detroit. Anyone know what fire this is? It's the Detroit Rebellion. That's what people call it, the Detroit Rebellion. Okay, which started here. Okay, so imagine this. A July as hot and thick and sweaty as only Detroit summer can be. Cop cars, the Vice Squad, prowling for after hours drinking and gambling venues, are still blocks away from a party inside the United Community and Civic League, which is the second floor of this building, to celebrate the homecoming of two soldiers who had just returned from another hot, humid place, Vietnam. Young Black men all over the United States, and especially Detroit, were getting drafted to risk their lives for a democracy in the style of the United States, which young Detroiters are increasingly suspicious of. The previous month, Muhammad Ali had been convicted for dodging the draft for only days after fighting an exhibition match at Cobo Hall in downtown Detroit. An image of that fight. No, he told the press, no, I am not going 10,000 miles from home to help murder and burn another poor nation simply to continue the domination of white slave masters of the darker people the world over. That domination was especially palpable in Detroit that summer. Police seemed to be brutalizing Black people for sport. Cynthia Scott was shot by police in the back as she tried to walk away. James Gendros was beaten on his own front porch by police. Kirby Brown was shot in his own backyard. And this after decades of police brutality, of facing mob violence, firebombs through bedroom windows for simply trying to move into a new home with white neighbors. And this indignity in a city which owed much of its existence to the enslaved labor of both Black and Indigenous people who skinned the pelts which would line the pocketbooks of Cadillac and his settlers. That summer of 1967, it was the auto industry, not furs, that drove the profits in Detroit. But as in Antoine Cadillac's time, those profits were not intended for the people who did the meanest work that generated that profit. This is the Joe Louis fist. It's a fist that really symbolizes Black power in downtown Detroit. Another boxer, different boxer. So maybe it's the heat. The Nain does prefer summer months. Or more likely, it's the growing thrum of no, the increasing anger, the burgeoning, reawakening, widespread belief in the possibility of something more, a sense of not accepting living out life under the fur-lined boot of white people. Was it the collective resonance of that rejection that summoned the name, vibrating the rich Black soil under the concrete? In the synchronized blink of city fireflies whose spark was about to hit peak synchronicity at the United Community and Civic League? Whatever it was, the story goes, pop, he appeared right there at the intersection of 12th and Claremont, where young Black Detroiters were about to say no in as direct a manner as they could in the long legacy of fires in Detroit. The Nain cartwheeled down 12th, red as ever, back handspringing, somehow reaching through the asphalt to the black soil beneath and throwing it into the air with each gymnastic revolution. So the Vice Squad that raided that club somehow thought that they could arrest all 84 people at once, and then they discovered that they could not. 10,000 people participated in that rebellion, which lasted almost a week. More than 500 buildings were burned. And I just want to say a little something about what that moment in Detroit's history really represents, because it was this moment of trying to take power back. This is from this Hope District on the east side of Detroit. And it narrates itself as like from this, the 1967 rebellion happened for social, political, and economic empowerment. This Hope District is a manifestation of the flame of 76. So this is what it really represents for many Detroiters. All right, I'm kind of winding down here. Let's. Okay, so the tale of the Nain Rouge was made popular outside of Detroit through this book, Charles Montgomery Skinner, and he compiled this this collection of folk tales. His whole purpose was to like really kind of make a canon of folk tales that were of settlers in this continent rather than in Europe. That was like his mission, was like kind of like settler pride. Uh, and I think it's really interesting. His particular sort of rendition of the Nain is really interesting because like I said, he was talking about like, you know, the Nain meddling in people's lives. He also talked a lot about the Nain messing with settler infrastructure. So it wasn't just like the battles and like the sort of the first these big dramatic moments. It was this sort of like the you know, the Nain as like a force against settler structures in a sort of more ongoing way. He attributed to the Nain all manner of monkey wrenching. And I think that was about Skinner sort of imbuing settler anxieties about lack of control, of the difficulties of managing people and lands that one has no business managing. Elsewhere, he noted, and he's a real charmer, Skinner. He says, "It's no more possible to predicate the conduct of an Indian than of a woman." He's yucky. Okay. So the Detroit Rebellion, launched waves of white flight. White Detroiters leaving the city for the suburbs, and this is usually narrated as disaster, as the beginning of this long economic crisis in the city, and it certainly was. I spent a lot of time in classes talking about the consequences of white flight for Black cities, for Black homeowners, and so I don't want to deny that. But here's an image that I sort of can't help but imagine, which is the Nain sitting atop a roof overlooking the new freeways built to usher those white flighters out of town. He's watching them go. Their 1968 station wagons packed to the hilt, maybe their tents, fleeing a city that they sense they no longer have control over. And he's relaxed. His feet are swinging cheerily. Bye, he's saying to each one. No one wanted you here anyway. Bye. Okay, so here's a post note that I think is hardly sort of necessary to think at this point, but I'm going to say it anyways, which is that the marchers, as they enact this sort of ritual of banishment of the Nain over and over, themselves take the form of Antoine Cadillac. And remember, it was Antoine who committed this first violence. The Nain just like knew the score. The Nain was like, I know what's going on here. So I think that maybe we should do the opposite of those marchers who want to banish the Nain. And I'm not like telling you to start a like what would the Nain do campaign, although I'm not not telling you that either, right? Mostly I just want to keep my job, so here we are. But mostly I think that the Nain is a reminder to confront colonial injustice with a little more audacity, knowing that if you do, there are trickster spirits, old, some of them red, agile, with varying levels of dental health, that that will cartwheel, cheer you, back you up hard, and maybe fan a few flames on your behalf. Thanks.
All right, wonderful. And I don't know how many other people think this should get published at some point for sure. So we'll support her in that. Absolutely. But for those, for now, we're going to give a short break. So anybody who did not get a raffle ticket, raise your hand and I'll get you one right now. That's right. All right. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do some giveaways here, and then we'll have the speaker back to answer some questions for you in just a second. So we're giving away. So for those of you who've been coming here for a while, we slowly give away your entire wardrobe so you can show it off. So we've given away shirts, obviously, hats, ball hats before, socks. What else am I missing? Anything else? I think that's it. And then now toques. So these you can show off proudly, tell everybody about the Grit City Think and Drink. These are limited edition. Once they're gone, we move on to another apparel type of thing, which we're not quite sure what it is yet. So we're taking ideas. But we have two to give away. So pull out your tickets and we'll do a little stuff here. And wait a minute. The host is old, and the numbers are small. Okay. Last three digits 803. 803. Woohoo! All right, and remember, these are stylish any season now. You can wear them in the heat of summer or in the winter. Either one's fine, I've been told. Sorry, I'm not cool. So, second number, last three digits 796. 796. Do we have a 796? Oh, excellent. Awesome. All right. And if you, what happened? Okay. Come on. There you go. So just to plug it in, if you want to get on the list for, I only send out announcements about the talk. So if you want to get on that, you can scan the QR code and put your email address in, and we'll send you announcements for each of the talks that comes up each month. If you want to see some of the past talks, this talk and other ones will be up on our archive, so you can go check it out at the Grit City Think and Drink. So if you just Google Tacoma Grit City Think and Drink, you'll find it. And there's an archive of all the talks we've been doing since we started recording. And if you have ideas for any future talks, jimgal@uw.edu, you can let me know, and I'd love to have some ideas. Other than that, thank you for coming, and we will bring our speaker up here. Let's give a big round of applause to our speaker one more time. Yes, question and answer.
I wasn't able to find very much. There was this kind of like period of of Nain silence. It's unclear. I don't know. I think honestly, one of the things that happened was that this sort of like connection to settler history of Detroit, it wasn't as like salient in some ways in like the 20th century, except for, I don't know, then it did come up again in during the rebellion. So I don't know. I don't know. So there's like a lot of different theories about where the name came from, because there's definitely like little like images that are a little like along these lines in French sort of fairy tales, and there's also, I mean, like nothing exactly like the name that you can find in like in like the direct sort of surrounding like indigenous cultures. But there's just like a long, these are like the Nain is like part of these kind of like long histories of trickster kind of figures, who are like about, about taking people down a notch when they need to be taken down. And I don't, it's like sort of unclear what, it's clear that the Nain is just Detroit. So there's something regional happening there. There's something like that's just about what happened there. And it's different than, for instance, like these like French fairy tales. So I don't know. I love the Nain, is how I feel. Do I believe in the Nain? Or do I not believe in the Nain? Believe is tricky. I like the Nain. I like thinking about the Nain. And I also just like, I mean, I I like to think that there are, old things that like support a just world, like old, you know, energies or old, things that have been there that know a place, um, that are moving things in that direction. That's what I like to think. That's what I like to feel. Is sort of rooted in that kind of knowledge, and and obviously we wouldn't know what any of those things were, And I like that the name is like a little bit of an embodiment of that as an idea, you know. And especially I mean, I'm a little bit of a materialist. This is definitely not my like this is not what I do exactly, but I like that it's attached to things that are very real, that really did happen. And to be able to be like, no, this is like the ways that I don't know, these energies or these sort of like things kind of like cross over in various ways. I don't know. Emma. As far as I can tell, it's still very, very white. Um, they do a lot. You know what's funny is if you like the images that it's a little like college where it's like where like the images that they put on the website have many many more black people in them than if you look at like big images of it and be like, oh wow, that's like you must have just zoned really close in on that little crew right there. But so there's that. I think they're getting more and more conscious of the optics. Um, of both the whiteness and also this like situation of like chasing the red man out of town, which you would think that would be like sort of obvious optics, but I guess it wasn't. I think they're getting a little bit more sensitive to that, or a little more like this is just fun. Like there's a tiny edge of defensiveness, I think, about it. I actually don't know how long this march will be able to sustain itself. Mostly just like sort of ideologically, because it's I think they're in a fraught position a little bit, and they're beginning to understand that. But I think that the fact that they were able to step in that position is like the dynamics that of the city that they were also just sort of randomly stepping into. Here, Mark. This is sort of the first time I've ever spoken about it outside of the home, but there's not like what there is out there are critiques of the march. There's like critiques of the march that are like, wow, you guys, this is a weird thing you're doing. Um, I don't think anyone has developed my particular love, but I'm not not that I know, but not that I have heard of. I think what there is like people just are like, no, I'm not going to go to that. Yeah, but I haven't heard of anybody like having a march or be like friend, this is power. There's spiritual power in the name. What exactly? Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. Not as far as I know. It's true that like it's a really really there's not really children, which is weird given that it's like a dress up and like yeah, I'd never really thought about it. I mean, it's not like the Nain is like taught about in school or anything. It's like it's a really kind of new, like sort of hipsterish, like thing that really is these two law students were like, well, we're gonna revive this wild story we heard, um, which is maybe why also there's not as many children because folks who are like moving from like these bigger cities, often don't have children, or folks who have children in Detroit often move out to the suburbs because they're wanting better funded schools. But I mean, it's a little bit unclear because the first sort of written record of the Nain was in this like the Tales of Le Detroit, which is like which was 1880. I have it written down. I said it, but now I can't remember. It was like the early 1800s, and the story is from like 1701, right? So it's like almost 200 years later. Um, but it was framed in that book. That book was just a volume of stories that wasn't French story tales. It was French fairy tales. It was like the stories of the French settlers. And Detroit, and the person who wrote it was part of this kind of like real aristocratic family that had like settled Detroit. Like, and you can tell a lot of the old moneyed settlers in Detroit, settler families, because they had farms that were done in ribbons. There were these things called ribbon farms that were so each farm had access to the water just in a little place, and so they were like, so here's the water, and each farm was like, zoop, 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 and each farm was named after a person, and those later formed the structure of streets. And so so a lot of the street names are named after these sort of early settlers. And the person who wrote it was part of that whole sort of like early landed aristocracy, and her whole goal too with the book was to be like, we're gonna sort of like hold up our French roots and the specific sort of roots in early Detroit. Yay, thank you. Thanks for coming, hearing about my weird hobby.